Okay, we're just picking up from where we left off last time in class, talking about exchange and rational choice theories. So we went through exchange theory, right? We went through a couple different theorists related to exchange theory, right? We talked about Homans, we talked about Blau, we even talked about Simmel in relation to that, right? And then we moved on to rational choice theory and looked at James Coleman, right? And we were talking about trust and, the advantages and the costs and the rational calculation that happens in trusting and the emergence of norms within that context. So Coleman sees norms emerging on the basis of actors' rational considerations. So norms develop out of repeated exchanges between a limited number of people who have an interest in maintaining a relationship with one another. The norms that emerge apply only to the individuals involved in those relationships. So his view really contrasts with things like structural functionalism that we've already discussed, where they think that norms are just taken as a pre-existing given, so something that people internalize universally within a social system. While Coleman's saying that the norms that emerge through interactions are really only applying to the people that were in those particular interactions or in those groups. Okay, so kind of building on that, the emergence and adherence of norms. So this is, again, kind of going back to what we're talking about with Homans. He also incorporated norms, such as his concept of distributive justice, into his version of exchange theory. So again, norms in the more sociological conventional view are just taken for granted behavioral expectations that people internalize so that they can, kind of interact or have shared values in a society. But according to Coleman, norms are really socially defined informal rights that control the actions of others. So when you establish a norm in Coleman's view, people are then required to forfeit the right to control some aspect of their own actions. So in that exact, that kind of exchange logic. So even when internalized by the individual, the existence of norms is always an open question. So meaning they have to be reproduced anew as people interact, and through those interactions weigh the costs and benefits of conforming to those norms or challenging those norms. So individuals who hold the right to control the actions of others are beneficiaries of the norms because they realize the benefits from encouraging others to perform or refrain from particular actions. The targets of the norms, in Coleman's view, are those who give up their rights to control their actions. So the beneficiaries also must be able to apply sanctions. Again, remember sanctions we talked about last time, they're rewards and punishments that, help ensure compliance. Right? So beneficiaries have to be able to apply sanctions to targets to get them to comply with their demands, especially in situations where targets have not internalized the desire to conform. So targets are rewarded by the beneficiaries with positive sanctions for compliance, and then targets are punished by the beneficiaries with negative sanctions when they engage in behavior that's not considered appropriate. So some people will internalize the demands that are coming from those people, and they will self-sanction their conduct by basically internally, kind of creating a system where they challenge themselves to perform the proper behavior, or what he calls internally generated rewards for performing proper behavior. So basically they're internalizing the demand that's coming from these beneficiaries, and they'll self-sanction their conduct, typically so that they can, again, receive those rewards and not, or, maybe avoid the punishments. So this comes down to, in rational choice, again, benefits and costs, right? So those who would benefit from encouraging or preventing particular behaviors may find that the rewards gained are outweighed by the cost of sanctions. So when looking at imposing sanctions, the distribution of power and resources determines who can or can't impose sanctions and who is or is not subjected to sanctions. So individuals with greater power and resources are less likely to abide by norms and also less likely to be sanctioned. It's less costly to sanction people of lower status, and this is a calculation that perhaps accounts for the fact that often the same violation will have harsher punishments like fines or prison terms for lower status people than for higher status people that get like a slap on the wrist. So according to Coleman, it's in one's self-interest to reproduce their own submission. So then open networks consist of a group of individuals who are connected to only a few members of the larger group, while closed networks consist of a group of individuals who have connections with and knowledge of many of the group's members. Okay, so finally moving past trust and norms. So free rider refers to an individual's rational decision not to participate in group activity if the goals of the group or the joint goods it produces cannot be denied to the individual, and if their supply is not reduced by other people consuming them. Coleman was also interested in group solidarity, how common interests derived from a shared structural position are not enough to produce group solidarity. Most people do not engage in collective action, like for instance, activism, that, will further their personal interests, right? That advocate for themselves. So an example of that could be, the working class failing to collectivize and demand a more equitable distribution of wealth in the richest country in the history of the world. So is it rational, though, that many do not engage in collective action? Because they look to other people to do it, as they will still be rewarded if those other people are successful in their actions. So the book example looks at those who engage in collective action to try and address climate catastrophe, right? So some people are totally willing to let other people fight for clean drinking water or clean air or to stop pollution because they themselves will also benefit from those fights. But they're not willing to incur the costs, such as going to jail or maybe just donating money to environmental protection groups, as everyone will be rewarded if others fight that fight. Or this also happens with things like, for instance, union membership. In this country, some workers choose not to join a union at their work when one is available, and even though they don't contribute money to the whole, they still benefit by having the raises and fair working conditions and other benefits that are provided by the union for all workers in a workplace. And this is coming from that landmark Janus decision in the Supreme Court in 2018 that said that non-members, and especially in public sector unions, that non-members do not have to pay dues to a union they don't support. So specifically for public sector unions like the ones I am in, and what's interesting is the assumption was that most people, if given the out, were going to stop paying their dues. And, when a couple of years later, they didn't have that drop that they thought that they would, then there's not been a noticeable decline in workers who choose to not pay their union dues, suggesting that people do see the positive power of collective action in their workplaces. So anyway, going back to Coleman's argument, participation yet exclusion from consumption. So why do some people participate in the production of joint goods when they can't be excluded from the benefits if they participate? So why are people paying union dues when they'll get the pay raise and other benefits that the union wins for workers even if they don't participate? So rational choice theorists offer three reasons why this might be. The first one is that groups can reward individuals for their participation through selective incentives. These are benefits that are distributed exclusively to those who bear the costs of providing a good. So selective incentives can take on any number of forms. This could be winning a leadership position in a revolutionary movement, or it could be something like getting a coffee mug or a bumper sticker because you donated to, PBS or something. Second, individuals may work towards achieving a group goal for the intangible benefits, right? We talked about extrinsic, intrinsic, the intangible benefits that participation can provide. So it could be their pride in union membership or their belief in a common good for themselves and for their coworkers. Or going back to that environmental example, they may do collective actions because they believe it's right and they value that belief. So third, free riding can be minimized by enforcing participation or negatively sanctioning individuals for not contributing to the public good. Okay, moving on to Coleman's theoretical orientation. A rationalist view is demonstrated when actors have a single principle of action, then of acting so as to maximize the relation of interest, as they weigh the potential rewards and punishments accompanying their behavior. Sorry, that was a direct quote. That's why it's complicated. So Coleman's rationalist approach to action is readily apparent in his conceptualization of trust, right? We talked about trust and that, it's a rational process where you gain things, you lose things, like you gain something from trusting someone else, but you also gain something from being trusted in the relationship that forms from there. So Coleman's orientation to the question of order, while predominantly individualist, he recognized the collectivist aspects of the patterning of social life. So his view states that it's best understood, or to best understand social life, then you have to be attuned to the feedback processes through which individual purpose action is translated into a collectivist or system level property that then works back down to influence the action of individuals. So we talked about this before in class. It's this cycle from individual action to collective action that then goes back to informing individual action again. So norms are collectivist constructs that can lead individuals to pursue particular courses of action because the sanctions that are attached to them condition the weighing of benefits and costs, and thus the likelihood of undertaking a given path of behavior. However, norms are not absolute determinants of action, right? They're basically just something that you've determined that there is a cost-benefit analysis going on there, right? So in his quote-unquote words, they are elements which affect individuals' decisions about what actions it will be in their interest to carry out, right? So really, norms, like he said, it's kind of his own departure from the more traditional sociological view of norms that are just something that we all kind of come to internalize. And he's saying it's through those particular exchanges or interactions that people come to kind of emerge their own sense of norms. And that depending on how the costs and the benefits are related to either performing that norm appropriately or not, that's going to affect someone's motivated action, and it can change over time, right? So for Coleman, theories that emphasize the collectivist determinants of social life present, quote, a fatalistic view of the future in which humans are the pawns of forces outside of their control, at the mercy of these uncontrolled external or internal forces. Persons are unable to shape their destiny. So Coleman's intent is to counter that viewpoint by basically saying that everything that is social must be created and maintained, right, through those interactions that people are having, and that those maintained or created accomplishments are going to be affected only through the purpose of action of individuals.